from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network. I am Reverend Charles Harrison, joining my co-host, Reverend Terry Webster Sr. And on this episode today, we're going to talk about a controversial issue. Is it time in Indianapolis to have a juvenile curfew with the increase of juvenile violence in Indianapolis that we have seen this year in 2023? I know there's some other cities who have done that, and we're going to talk about that today on this episode about whether or not it's time for Indianapolis to issue a curfew to help curb the surging juvenile violence. Welcome to Real Talk with Reverend Terry Webster Sr. and Reverend Charles Harrison. And thank you so much for joining us today as we are going to talk about this whole issue of juvenile and children's curfews in Indianapolis. In 2023, we have seen a dramatic increase in youth violence in the city. And people are scratching their head, Reverend Webster, as to what we ought to do about this issue. We just had a 15-year-old this week who was killed on the west side of Indianapolis around 21st Street and North Girls School Road. And listen, the suspects that were arrested was a 14-year-old and a 19-year-old. So basically, you have three young people who's been impacted by one incident, one killed, and two arrested. We have seen a dramatic increase, and I think 2023, we're running at a record-breaking pace for youth homicides and youth shootings in the city. So it is an issue that we are grappling with as a city, what to do about it. Well, one of the issues that we want to talk about today is whether or not we ought to issue a curfew and enforce it. Some people are saying that it is a parenting issue, and they want to know where the parents are.
Right. Where
are the parents at? Why are these young people out these late hours, early in the morning time? So some people want to put the blame on the parent. Well, if there's no supervision taking place from a parent or some guardian of these young people, do we have a responsibility as the city, as the community, to step in? So that's what we want to talk about today.
Good afternoon, Reverend Harrison. It's always good to be with you and share some thoughts on issues in our community. Been away for a few Fridays, but I'm glad to just be back and sharing. We were in conversation, Reverend, about this very issue with a group of police at the table. And one of the things the police said to us, again, is that on the canal, a lot of these kids down there, 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning are juveniles.
Right.
And so, again, the question is, where's parental supervision? Where's parental parenting going? So I think we have, and unfortunately, I think we have a parenting problem. I think we have a parenting problem if you don't know where your child is after curfew. I think that leads to the other problems that we're seeing. So I think that the city has a responsibility that if we do have an ordinance that's already the law of the land, the ordinance of the land, I think we have to get around to now enforcing it. I think we can no longer turn the other cheek, because if you passing up that 14 and 15-year-old that should be at home at this time of morning, you're going to have to stop as law enforcement, ask them to show some ID. Let them know that they're breaking law. I even think it needs to come down to where parents need to be paid a visit.
Okay.
As it relates to all of these ordinances that are broken. You were going over a Baltimore statement from the mayor. He said, and he had a good statement that he made as it relates to ordinances with these children. I just think that we got to get back to enforcing these type of ordinances that we already have.
Well, that is a good question, and I want to, for those who are listening to Reverend Terry Webster Sr. and I on this podcast, Real Talk, as we talk about the violence in Indianapolis. The mayor of Baltimore and they have updated their curfew ordinance in the city of Baltimore. And children under the age of 14 must be inside by 9 p.m.
Wow.
Okay, that sounds like old school.
Yes, sir.
Parenting and what used to happen when I was that age, way back in the 70s. While teens in Baltimore, ages 14 to 16, must be inside by 10 p.m. on school nights and 11 p.m. on non-school nights, so that if you are 16 and under in Baltimore, you have to be in the house between 14 and 16 by 10 p.m., 11 p.m. on the weekends, and if you're 14 and under, 9 p.m. So that 9 p.m. is for any day. And they're doing it in response. And this is what the mayor of Baltimore said. Never will I say that curfew and curfew alone is about saving young people from committing acts of violence. It is about another tool in keeping our young people safe and finding out what we need to do to help those young people who are just clearly unsupervised and in many cases unsupported.
Okay.
So we're dealing with this whole issue of young people who are unsupervised. So it goes back to what you talked about, this whole parenting issue.
But I would push back on the mayor a little bit, because I would say that you're doing them both. You're saving them from acts of violence, but you're also saving their lives too. So I would push back a little bit, because I think it does save them from acts of violence. Because if you're in the house, you can't go get into something mischievous.
Well, that is true. That is true.
You can't go get into something mischievous if you are off the street.
Well, let's talk about this, because I wonder, did Indianapolis have a curfew? And I just want to get into what I'm hearing. The state of Indiana does have a curfew law. Curfew hours for minors younger than 15 years old is being out in public places is 11 p.m.
For minors.
For minors.
Okay.
So if you're 15 years and under, it is 11 p.m.
That's weekdays. That's weekends.
Any day.
That's any day.
Any day. So they cannot be out between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. on any day.
Yeah, I remember Reverend Harrison, when we were coming along, they used to say, the commercial would come on, it's either 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock. Could have been 11 o'clock. It is 11 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?
Do you remember the time when it came on at 10 o'clock?
Okay, well, it could have been 10 o'clock.
Yeah, at 10 o'clock, do you know where your children are? I remember that.
and these are things that really we should put into the conscience of parents. Because when I was young and I would see that commercial,
right.
That would say to me, wow, somebody care.
Yeah, that's true. But here's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that one of the issues is the juvenile courts, that the juvenile courts don't want law enforcement bringing these young people downtown. Now, I remember when I first got started with Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition in the late 90s, I think it was 1999,
yeah,
that that was a problem then. And as we were trying to grapple with how do we bring the level of violence down in Indianapolis from, I think the record-breaking year was in 1998, which, really was the impetus of 10-point farming in 1999. We would have nights where I remember law enforcement and community were working together to address this issue of youth violence. And one of the things that they wanted to do was implement the curfew law.
Okay.
So there would be a site picked out. Sometimes it was at a school, sometimes it was at a church or a community center, and law enforcement would enforce it. And what they would do is that they would bring the juveniles that were out past the curfew to the location where there would be community members and law enforcement there and representatives from the prosecutor's office. And we would make a phone call to the parent. So if the child was brought in, they violated the curfew, they would bring the child to this location, and then a call would be made to the parents, and the parents would have to come and pick them up.
Right.
We wouldn't take them downtown, but there was a place where these kids would be dropped off at by law enforcement, but the kids could not leave until their parent or some adult supervisor came and picked them up, or someone who was providing supervision for them, or guardian or someone came and picked them up. I'm seeing a lot of young people out on the streets, after 10 p.m. And as a parent with two teenage children, I don't say I'm stunned, Reverend Webster, but I'm troubled by all of these kids being out after 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. on school nights, and certainly after 11 p.m. on weekends.
Well, I think we need to go back, and that would be certainly one suggestion, and that suggestion would be, hey, let's go back to what worked. I think you told me before we came on air, you told me that I asked you what happened, and you said, well, it went good for a few weeks, but then I guess juveniles got a hold of the information that, hey, you're going to be picked up.
Right.
And it tapered off.
Right.
But anything works now, or anything should be tried. So I would say, hey, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. Let's go back to doing that. Let's talk to law enforcement, prosecutors, and some of us would be willing to be cites.
Right.
And let's go back to doing the same thing.
Well, I agree. If we can get the city involved, the IMPD, law enforcement community, the courts, juvenile involved, because I think it does become an issue of the village now getting involved in this. If for whatever reason, if it's a parenting issue, if these children are homeless, because there are a lot of young people who are homeless, how do we collectively address this issue of, supervision of our children and youth in a way that protects them?
Yeah.
Protects them from getting in trouble, protects them from either committing an act of violence or being the victim of an act of violence. It just troubled my heart this week that, a 15-year-old was killed, and then the news that a 14 and a 19-year-old were responsible. It just broke my heart. But that is the new reality of the day that we're living in.
It's starting to be, really it is. But I still think that there is hope. I think the community just have to find ways, such as you said, to get involved ourselves. And if the courts don't want want law enforcement bringing them downtown, filling their cells, then let's get back to talking about maybe our facilities would be a holding place. That serves as a couple of purposes, because also it gives us a chance to really have a conversation in a tactful way with that parent that's picking that child up.
Right,
Say,
right.
Hey, ma'am, sir, is there any reason why is this the norm for your child?
Right.
It gives us just conversation.
Right.
So that's one way that I think that it's an easy, low-hanging fruit. What do you think?
Well, I do agree with that, because I think we may find out, as community leaders, community representatives, what may be going on in the life of a child and even that parent. I was out on the Far East Side a couple of weeks ago, and I ran into a parent who was talking to me and other leaders in the community, and from 10 Point about, Reverend Webster, her struggle with just raising her 15-year-old son. He was one of many children she had, but she was frustrated, because she felt like that she didn't have much control over him anymore, and that he was doing what he wanted to do and was getting in trouble. Yeah. And this parent was kind of crying out for help. Yeah, and how many other parents out there are crying out for help for whatever reason. Some parents don't have the kind of control at home that they would like, but others do.
And these are things that we can find out, learn about, so that we can perhaps offer ourselves or offer other mentors. The judge said a couple weeks ago in our Real Man Summit, he said that he was coming from.
Which judge? So the listeners.
Well, I really didn't want to call him, but I will.
But you call it, okay, one of the judges in the city.
Yeah, one of the judges in the city. But that's okay. Judge Gaither. Judge Gaither doesn't mind me. But Judge Gaither said that he had left a detention with 38 people in detention. He said out of that 38 people that were in detention, 27 were black. He said, and out of that 27 that were black, he said 24 were males. But then here's the stunning thing. He said, I don't know what to do. Now that's what he said, when we talk about is the juvenile situation a crisis, yes it is. Because here's a judge that's saying, I don't know what to do. And yet we got to do something.
But I think the dilemma is, and I think what we're struggling with, I think the judge is depicting what the problem is. What do we do? Some say we ought not to lock them up because disproportionately blacks are, locked up at a disproportionate rate. But we're also seeing a disproportionate number of young blacks committing violent crimes and being the victims of violent crimes. So is accountability one piece of it? I think the other piece of it certainly is the home.
Yeah.
You are a father, you raise 2 children. I am a father. I have currently 2 teenage children. I think it's a struggle sometimes as a parent. In today's time, I think it's a little different when it comes to Jeremiah and Jalen than it was for Terrell and Shayla. They're years apart, but I think it's more challenging today than it was for the first 2 kids. But yet I do think as a parent, I try, Reverend Webster, to do what I can to protect the kids. And the balance is I want them to be young and have fun with young people, but I want it done at hours that I feel like doesn't put my kids in even more jeopardy. You know what I mean? So anything that they do has to be completed and done prior to 10 p.m. And normally I'm bringing them home. I'm there picking them up, so they're not coming home on their own. I'm there, and during the week is 9 p.m.,
Well, see, whether they understand it or not, and I'm sure in your case you've talked to them, but you're helping save their lives.
Right.
And because if not, I was in a conversation the other day at a workshop, and the statement was made by one of the presenters that for the first time, he said, I'm scared that my children won't outlive me.
Wow.
He said, I'm scared of that.
Wow.
He said, because of the violence and because of the society, he said, this is the first time I can say that we see a generation that we may have to bury ourselves.
Yeah, and that's why I think this whole issue and Reverend Terry Webster Sr. and Reverend Charles Harrison, are calling for from our mayor, from the city county council, IMPD, other law enforcement, because we're seeing the same problem in Lawrence. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but there's absolutely a lot of violence in Lawrence. I think that all of the cities in Marion County ought to really go to a curfew.
Yeah. I definitely agree.
Yes.
Because if we have it on the book and now we know that it is a problem and it is an ordinance.
Right.
Now it's time to enforce the ordinance.
Right.
Because if you enforce the ordinance, you're getting pushback. You got the whole community behind you. You got guys like myself, you, others, other parents as well. No, let's enforce it.
Yes.
We don't know whose life we may be saving by saying, hey, if you're on the streets after this time. I agree with the mayor of Baltimore.
Right.
Enforce the law.
Yep. We're calling for the enforcement of the curfew laws, the Indiana curfew laws, in all of our cities, really in central Indiana, because we know Anderson and Kokomo and Muncie are having the same problem. And unless collectively the courts, juvenile courts, along with the mayors, law enforcement, community leaders come together and let's find a solution to, once we enforce it, what do we do with these kids? Right. Do we set up centers in these cities so that when they are picked up, that those kids are brought to these locations and then we call their parents to come and pick them up so we can have a conversation with their parent or legal guardian about these children, and hopefully we won't have the same kids violating the curfew and having to deal with the same parent or guardian. And I think that then becomes another conversation. But
I think that's a simple solution, though.
Right.
I think it's a simple solution, and the leadership of our communities should be willing to get involved with that. If there's a problem, I can see, but not really, but I can see, let's just say you arrest 100 people and put them in the juvenile center,
right.
Then there's a problem right there.
Right.
But if we're willing to come alongside and do what we can to help city leaders enforce the ordinance, and then we'll be ready to come alongside and help. That's a simple solution.
I think so. I think it is a simple solution. It gets all of us involved in it. And it's about our young people, our children, our adolescents, and our youth, about helping to keep them safe and to save their lives. This has been Reverend Terry Webster Sr. and Reverend Charles Harrison on Real Talk today. We hope that you have been blessed by this conversation. We certainly want to deal with the issues that are prevalent in our community. We pray that you would join us the next time on Real Talk as we deal with real issues that affect our community here in Indianapolis, across central Indiana, and even across the country. Be sure to subscribe and follow this podcast and share it on Facebook and Twitter. This is Reverend Terry Webster Sr. and Reverend Charles Harrison. We pray that you have a blessed and an awesome day.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.